Hello and welcome to Board Game Co. I'm Jesse Anderson.
I'm Chronicles. Wait, let me do. I'm Chronicles of Drunagar, Age
not
of
what I do.
Apocalypse,
That's
and
not-
I think this game. That is what you do.
No, it's not
That is what
I
you do.
You're trying to mimic my newscaster voice. That's
It's not your newscaster. Oh my gosh, okay. I'm having none of this.
Hello, welcome to Board Game Co. Today we're talking about Chronicles of Drunagar, Age of Apocalypse.
Does that sound different? Does that sound in any way different?
I mean, it's a little different.
Chronicles of Drunagar, Age of Apocalypse. This is going to be a review, sort of. What that means is
Review, sort of.
Well, because here's the thing. When you have a review of content you already... I have a review of content.
Well, I mean, you'd never review a game you haven't played the entirety of.
Well, first of all, I would.
Oh, okay.
Second
you'd
of all,
never review a prototype.
Second of all, this was easy to play the entirety of because it's only 4 missions.
Yeah,
different conversations.
This is a prototype. This is a game. You're what, 10 episodes deep in the original core
No,
box?
I didn't get that far. I'm like 7 episodes deep in the original core box.
Close enough.
Then I set it aside because I have more content. I want to continue it. I just didn't get around to it. And then I got this, which technically takes place after the last one. So I have some spoilers around what happened after the last one. So, I mean, I'll finish it eventually, but yeah.
Either way, this is a review, sort of. We're going to be going through the highs and lows, comparing it to your original review of Chronicles of Drunagar, and talking about what's new, our thoughts, concerns, what might make this right or wrong for you, depending on how you approach big box games like this.
Yeah. So it's not a review of this. It's a review. It's talking about how we felt about Chronicles of Drunagar, and then talking about the changes here and how they impact, improve, negative, all those things, as well as just informing you about our general experience with it.
Now, I've had about 3 going on to 4 episodes of Chronicles of Drunagar.
Sure.
We did a gameplay of this, which is going to be over on Quackalope, and so I am not as experienced as you.
Okay.
But I still have a lot of highs and lows, and I have reasons why I'm really hoping to not only get the base game back to the table, but I'm really looking forward to getting this one eventually.
So maybe it's a review for you.
We're going to talk about that. It's not a review. It's a review-ish.
Let me give a high-level overview of Chronicles of Drunagar if you don't know about it. Because, by the way, prototype, link down below, it's on GameFound, all those things. Make sure to go ahead and follow on GameFound because you'll get a free miniature if you do. So all that stuff's very helpful. Past that, Chronicles of Drunagar is going to be a dungeon exploration game with a lot of fun leveling up. In fact, that I would say is the high key point of Chronicles of Drunagar is going to be the leveling up system and then the way your cube interactions are placed. Because on your turn, you're going to take an action, you're going to slot it down in one of your any number of abilities that will level up and develop throughout the course of the game. Take that action, and then once all your cubes are gone, you're going to go ahead and take a darkness cube, and if you take too many darkness cubes, first of all, you're blocking the slot, and second of all is curse cube, not darkness cube.
Yeah, you're buffing and debuffing yourself.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a balance of managing your actions, managing your board, and then once every scenario is actually done, once you've defeated the various monsters and or boss, this, by the way, on the table is a completely fictional scenario. I just grab boards and set them up. But once you're done with all that, you're going to go ahead and level up your character in any number of a variety of ways. You're going to get new equipment. You're going to get new skill sets. You're going to go on class pathways. You're going to have a whole new sideboard full of the abilities related to your class. You're going to have your role. So if I'm the leader, you're a support right now. There's going to be a variety, just tons of ways.
That's how that went.
That's going to be a ton of ways as far as how you level up and develop throughout this game. Other things worth mentioning, there's going to be a darkness system where darkness is going to be constantly chasing you throughout the dungeon.
It's basically closing off the tunnels and pathways in a classic dungeon crawl. So instead of maneuvering around the room with full freedom, you're not only running away from this encompassing blackness, you're also dealing with whatever's directly in front of you.
You're going to have doors, which you will open as you choose to open them, and then lay out in full new dungeon pathways on the board, so you don't actually know what the dungeon is as you're going through it. And there are QR codes on those doors, not on the prototype, but in the original Chronicles of Drunagar, there are QR codes, so you have different options and pathways and what's going to happen there. And
with a really interesting tile and sequencing system that allows you to have levels and set up kind of bridges over chasms, along with interactions and checkpoints, which is what you were opening up to. Probably one of the coolest innovations this game has done.
Yeah, there's going to be an interaction system in this game where you're going to have these interactions where you can choose different ways of interacting with various things. Maybe you find some body sprawled in the dungeon and you have a choice to grab the necklace.
You could pickpocket them. You could check to see if they're alive. You could make sure they're still murdered.
Investigate the pool of blood around all these different options. And Chronicles of Drunagar,
back away slowly and not enter the room. Literally, that's probably an option.
And that's going to be, I guess, a high-level overview of what this game does. Lots of leveling up, lots of dungeon exploration, interaction systems, and a cube management system.
Work? What's the length of the base game campaign overall?
I'd have to finish it. The length of the base game campaign, if I recall correctly, was 18 missions. Okay. So I'm about 7 missions deep into that 18 missions. Lots of different... It's linear. It's very linear in what it does. And then if you have the various expansion content, then you can add on different side quests or different things. By the way, I'm not certain, I believe all the original content is available to purchase on GameFound in case you missed out on that. Past that, let's talk about the changes. Well, before we do that, I've reviewed Chronicles of Drunagar. I'll throw a link to that down below. What was your general impressions of Chronicles of Drunagar?
I'm intrigued by it. It's messy. It's a lot to set up. I like the leveling system. I love the encounter system. That is probably, for me, one of the coolest things. The beautiful artwork, the ability to go down different narrative pathways and make decisions based off of an encounter.
Limited decisions. You have an interaction token that will decrease as you have each encounter. So you have...
That's the cool part. There's this pressure of what didn't I get a chance to do, or what would have happened if I, like, what does that necklace do if I grab it off the dead body instead of checking to see if they're still alive? I got a companion, or I got a friend, I got some food, but I didn't get that other thing. The encounter system is super cool. The dungeon crawl system, the kind of encompassing blackness, the interesting kind of creatures that you're fighting, all of that's fun, but very classic dungeon crawl for me. I don't know that it does any of those necessarily better than other dungeon crawls,
I agree.
but I'd say it does it equally, if not, like, it's fun.
Yeah.
And then the leveling and puzzle system, I think it reflects the nature of the game. It's messy, it's complicated, it's a lot to get your head around when you're first playing, but once you start understanding the flow, you actually have a lot of flexibility with how you approach that system. You get to feel like you're upgrading your character, you get to feel like you're genuinely kind of restricting and making hard decisions about what you can and can't use moving forward, and as sort of an adventuring party should experience, you're getting stronger and weaker at the same time, more exhausted as you explore. The base game is probably, and I do points because it gives me a little bit more nuance. The base game is probably a 3.5, leaning towards a 3 for me, for the sole fact that it's a bit more than I can reasonably get onto the table. I want to. That's the weird part for me, right? Based off your system, I want to get it to the table, but that alone has kept me from getting it to the table. When we get to this...
We'll talk about this soon.
Yeah,
we'll talk about this in a second.
And so keep that 3.5 in mind with context to where this is positioning itself. Because I think I would have leaned towards a 4 before I'd been introduced to something different.
So for me, my high level note, again, full review if you want to watch it, my high level notes is I love the abilities. Leveling up is always fun. There's tons of pathways. The dungeon system, I agree with you. It's fine. Not better, not worse.
It's cool.
Yeah, it's fine.
Cool. It's still a little clunky and messy.
The interaction system, I love. The unfolding doorways, I love, with the caveat that it slows down gameplay as you unlock them. Past that, I would say the cube system and the limitation, love that. My dislikes of the game are going to come down to a few different things. I have this minor bickering about the fiddliness of the darkness system, which doesn't stop me from enjoying the game. I just don't love or appreciate the darkness system. The biggest, we'll get to the biggest in a second, the abilities to a certain extent across all the classes you have and all the ways you can branch. At a certain point, there's just overlap. There's only so many ways you can actually say defend 2, deal 2 damage,
range 4.
So some degree of repeat. Tons of ways to do things. I'm still thrilled with it, but that's definitely a factor. My biggest thing is very much going to be like what you said. I had minor quibbles about the rulebook. It was very in detail, potentially too in detail. I felt it said everything twice, so it really covered a lot. It's just hard to get through it. My biggest thing is like what you said. It's a game that when I play it, like those 7 games, I believe I've set this game up twice. Twice? No, 3 times. Actually, I did 3 times. That's right. I did 3 times. But I set the game up 3 times, and each time was a chore to jump back in. Every time I put it away and then put it away, I'm like, okay, I have to be willing to play 2 or 3 games before I set it up again.
Yeah.
And it's a game that, because of that, that's why I've stopped at 7. I believe I've played 1 game post my review, and then sadly had to clean it up.
But if you set it up again, you'd make it to 11.
Correct. Ideally. So it's one that definitely, the amount of stuff it takes, the table space, and I had a lot of people in my feedback, in my comment section last time, who were like, it's a dungeon crawler, what do you expect? That's fair. I'm cool with that. It just, to me, barrier to entry is definitely a big factor. My system, I gave it a 4. I'd say probably higher than your 3.5. If I was doing a point system, it probably would be like it's hard. I really like the game. It's probably higher than a 4, but dinged down to a 4 because of the accessibility aspect, just by the way I personally play games.
Yep.
Which brings us to Apocalypse. Apocalypse is going to be introducing a few things, and we're going to go through each of those things one step at a time, as well as engaging how they interact with our feedback. And to begin with, the very first thing, we're just going to point by point going through this. This is going to differentiate from my usual format of like, didn't like, and see how it's not liking, because we're talking about the changes and how it impacted our experience.
Yeah.
And to begin with, one change that we did not get to experience, but we just know is coming, is going to be the addition of better trays. I don't know if it's game trays. I don't want to say game trays. There's going to be better trays for all their stuff. I'd show you pictures if I could.
Yep.
But like the token trays, instead of having just a singular, I don't know if you remember, there's like 4 long rows.
Yep.
They're taking that exact shape and branching it up to multiple individual compartments for each token type.
It's part of the learning experience. I think one of the biggest points of feedback they got, not only from us, but from the community as a whole, is, again, getting it to the table, getting things organized, being able to play the game. You ended up supplementing tokens any general token.
I just grab tokens. I'm
for
like, oh, blood,
markers,
okay.
for indicators, for any of the mix. And really, with a better organizing system, I think there's a way to do that where you can actually grab the sequence.
And it's not just that one trade. There's like 3 or 4 trades. I've already seen mock-ups for a few of them, introducing ways to store the cards, ways to store the doors. They're trying to make everything more accessible in terms of the ability to pull something out on the table and not have as much barriers to entry. In theory, that's a plus. I have to actually play with them and engage with them to tell you more, but in theory, I certainly like the idea. Past that, there's going to be new heroes, new adventures, new items, new classes, all the basic stuff you'd expect in a game like this. Some of them from the base game, some of the expansions, packs, whatever you can buy.
And it opens up the door to either playing, if you're someone that likes to replay Dungeon Crawlers, it opens the door to replaying the campaigns, kind of
why would you want to replay the campaign? It's so linear. Or the original base game is so linear.
Or doing the modular...
The original base game is so linear.
Or doing the modular kind of open-ended dungeon crawl system, which is interesting and nice. For me, I always like when games introduce brand new characters, brand new weapons, brand new abilities, because it just adds to the puzzle that you already have.
So I agree with you, and sarcasm aside, I'm focusing on that point of the original base game being linear because the question I have with these things is, Chronicles of Ren-O-Gar, even base game, gave me enough characters that, honestly, I don't feel I need more. I want more, sure. But it's not like I'm going to play the game enough times to benefit from those more anyway.
How many times have you and I sat down and just on this prototype alone?
We'll get to that.
I'm just...
But, so... I liked the amount of characters the original had, and I'm always fine with more, but I also don't need more because it's not like I'm going to replay the campaign with that many times. I'm just not going to get the benefit from it. One point we will touch upon, just in case you're not patient enough, so I don't want to tease this, but one point we'll touch upon the end is one of the biggest changes to this experience is there are a lot more reasons to replay this game, which we'll come back to shortly. Before we get there, upgradable abilities. They have a new thing, a new way to upgrade.
Yeah, I haven't actually dug into this very much. I understand the core concept is you're going to have another slot that happens up here where you can place down tokens.
No, not there. It's going to be directly over. So
directly over top of it.
Some of the things that are new in the prototype we didn't get to experience yet. This is going to be one of them. There's they just gave us 1 or 2 tokens to show us how it works. But there's going to be overlaid tokens that go on top of your abilities that literally your core abilities.
Instead of upgrading your kind of side abilities with new cards, weapons, and gear, you're actually going to be building onto your main board.
Yeah.
I like it.
It's another way of upgrading.
The hope is, it's another way to upgrading, another bit of variability. The hope is that they have more fun, interesting ways to twist the characters and make them feel a little bit more asymmetric, because your complaint from the original was that characters had a little bit of repeat.
A little bit. Across 15 characters, you're going to have that. Now, full transparency, while I like more ways of upgrading, understand... I assume a small little cardboard token that's on your board, I assume that's going to further add to the fiddliness. So factor that in accordingly as well. Past that, so that's going to be tokens over there. Past that, changes to the darkness system. So they're adding ways that the darkness system works in the game. Do we
want to dive into how that's going to work? Right now, our experience has been, instead of it spreading from kind of the back end of the dungeon, closing off the tunnels behind you, it'll actually start popping out and spreading from you yourself. And so whoever is the strongest currently is going to, in our experience, is going to be the source of the darkness, and it just starts closing off the regions around them. This does 2 important things. First off, it doesn't work as just a mechanic that keeps you from going backwards and pressing you forward, kind of like a sliding scale. It now actually works closing off a scene and having some real decisions about how close you are to companions, where you are when it comes to a big boss fight, how you place down the tiles based off of what might spawn, and when you take a detour to do things like grab a treasure chest versus run straight to the door to kind of get through and continue moving. It's much more threatening, while still maybe not the best mechanic. I don't know if you're more interested in it now. I do find it increases the puzzle of it slightly more.
Yeah, so basically that's where I am. I didn't love the original darkness mechanic, and also to be clear, like the original Chronicles of Ren-O-Gar, different scenarios may have different ways. This is just a new way.
That's what I was saying. The way we've experienced so far has been this way.
And so I like it better than the original, primarily because you have to spread it from the strongest hero, but past that you have more choice. You don't have to spread it towards the strongest hero. There's a little more control over what you do with it once it's under the strongest hero, which gives a little more to the puzzle. So it's still fiddly, still doesn't do that much for me. It is a marginal improvement over the original, at least from someone who didn't love the original.
We did have one scenario where we had more or less closed off access to a creature that we had to kill because of the darkness and the way that it spawned. That was an interesting puzzle because we had to decide who was going to suffer to go back and attack them. And then when we were facing off against a larger creature, we had a scenario where if a turn or two had lasted, if it lasted a round or two longer, we would have legitimately been struggling with where to position you
Yeah.
based off of where the darkness might spread.
It has a gameplay mechanic. It has a gameplay relevance and basis. I just don't love it. I'm not against it. I just don't.
I've always been more intrigued by the darkness than you. I think thematically, I find it really cool.
Thematically, I love it.
Yeah.
Just gameplay-wise, it's adding a full other trade to now put on the table.
Yeah.
And it adds, I don't think it adds enough. Again, I like the improvement. I think it is an improvement, but it's still a system that if you got rid of it and replaced it with some other balancing factor,
Wouldn't necessarily miss it.
I wouldn't miss it.
Sure.
Yeah, that's, again, my own personal opinion. Then from there we had companions. Companions are going to be a new aspect.
Yeah. Can I talk about how we get them?
Sure, spoilers to other changes, but go ahead.
So there's decisions that you make throughout the course of this game, and this one is going to be emphasizing the branching possible pathways that you can go down. We'll get into that a little bit more in depth soon, but one of the consequences or benefits or banes that you can get as you go down these branching pathways is the decisions you make could lead to companions journeying along with you that have real impact on other story elements, on scenarios and kind of events that happen here. I just want to talk about the story.
We'll get to that soon. The story's the last bit because it's the best part, just for context. But yeah, so companions. We're going to have companions. They're going to effectively act like pets. They're going to be just little guys that can go around the board, the same targeting rules as pets for the most part, but they have gameplay interactions as well. Having companions with you may or may not trigger certain interactions. We'll get that the story part shortly.
Like your person, every time you wipe someone out, you're spawning...
Well, that's just straight up a pet. That's not a companion.
Well, sure.
That's. I mean, unless you consider the undead pet a companion.
Well,
but yeah. So that's going to be that. Then we have furniture interactions. We have furniture is going to be a new concept in Chronicles of Drunagar. We had a minor taste of those rules in the idea that chests in this game currently acted like furniture, but there's going to be actual furniture in the game. Furniture that can be basically manipulated through things like telekinesis, where you can slam a chair or a table or whatever into some creature, dealing damage to it. And particularly in the case of chests, the trap that rolls when you activate a chest,
you'd actually hit the creature.
Yeah, you do lose all the shiny stuff.
Or you can be a reasonable human or I guess reasonable halfling bard and go open the chests.
Now's a good time to tell you there's a gameplay.
It's the right decision to make.
Over on his channel where he does things that I disagree with. But yeah, that's going to be that. Then we have interaction rewards. Interaction rewards are aimed to be improved. The original game had a lot of interaction rewards that were very minor buffs. Gain 2 health, gain a focus, gain whatever. We're still going to have some of that, but the interaction rewards are in general aimed to be more meaningful so that the choice, which already felt tough and tense and what do I do, a little more impact to how those play out.
Yeah, the consequence of the story is emphasized and re-emphasized in this game.
And now we can get to your favorite part.
Now we can get to the story. So this is going to introduce the idea of sort of choose your own adventure, branching narrative pathways that actually have real-time consequences throughout the course of the game. So we're talking about literally our favorite system in the original. This is now going to be emphasized and sort of fine-tuned. They've brought on like a professional writer, I believe, to craft and weave these interlocking story narratives. Like, do you make a decision to rescue someone or leave food or steal a necklace? And that, instead of just being a thing that gives you food or gives you a necklace or gives you a little bit more stamina, this is going to be a thing that you write down a keyword and 2 or 3 series down, if you saved them, there's a action you can take. If you have the necklace, there's an action you can take. And these are major. These are skip entire scenarios. These are defeat a big boss without fighting. These are the boss gets buffed to the point where the odds of beating him
are crazy.
It really has. I don't know how to re-emphasize this.
I'll go through some of the pathways.
That'll be interesting. It really has major branching pathways to a point where replayability in this game is essential, nearly.
I mean, essential is a strong word.
I know, but
combine the new characters.
Unless you're going to open up the book and just begin reading the pathways,
you're not as rewarding.
You're going to be left. Every scenario is going to leave you left with, I'd say, 3 to 5 at least core what-if questions. What if I'd made a decision here differently? What if I'd spent that resource instead of taking this action? What if instead of charging twice, I only did once?
I'll get to the stuff because I'm gonna include a spoiler tag as I go through some examples of interactions we've had. But I once you combine the heroes I want to experience with reasons to dive into the campaign again, I think the branching narrative stuff is by far the best change and addition to Chronicles of Drunagar Apocalypse.
And it's on our favorite part of the game.
Yes. It's on the interaction system, which matters so much more now. There's going to be things, and again, we'll go into specific examples soon, but there's going to be things like rooms you can uncover. There's going to be rooms you might otherwise never interact with. There's going to be branching doorways you can take depending on what you do. There could be full scenarios where you may engage with one scenario or not, depending on what happened in a prior scenario. There's going to be interactions you have with various things where it's going to read something and it's going to say, well, if you have that NPC, do this. If you've done that before, do this. Tons of, in our gameplay, we met this family. I'll tell you about the consequences soon, but we met this family. and the family is starving. And you chose to give them
all of our food.
All of our food, which now is a good time to talk about the fact that there are about to be some spoilers here. So skip to the next timestamp if you don't want to see any spoilers, because I'm going to give you some of the ideas of the things we've interacted along the way.
Okay.
We gave the family our food. I wanted to give half our food. You said all the food.
I said all of it. Why not?
We did all the food. As a result, we walked through the next 3
We're
scenarios.
We're literally fighting hunger.
We're fighting hunger the whole time. Every time we rolled a die that was odd, we missed by default, which means we had a much lower chance of hitting. We halved our chance of hitting because you chose to give all our food away, even though we were warned we will be hungry, we will be starving. But then later in the encounter, we found some merchant in the cellar. And the merchant, unfortunately, was, well, not going to go too much spoilers. The merchant had some checkered past, and we took his cheese. But we took his cheese, we got rid of the hunger mechanic, but then he turned into a monster that we had to fight. A different pathway with that merchant ends up with him as a companion with you.
Not a monster at all.
Not a monster, just a companion.
He could have been our friend.
And then later you encounter...
If only we weren't starving and selfish.
You encounter a hanging body later in the square, which has a different interaction path depending on if that merchant companion was with you or not. The undead horseman. We encountered him in our initial scenario where we get stomped, because you're supposed to get stomped. And then later, the final scenario of this, of the Apocalypse prototype we had, is going to be encountering again. The things you did in the first encounter have impacts on the second. You want to touch upon some of those?
I mean, there was a chance for us to bow down and worship this creature. Which,
subservient.
If we get to the end of the scenario and face him again and decide to taunt and talk about our greatness, he laughs in our face and literally mocks us for cowering before him. There was a chance of charging him, fighting head on, which is in essence what we did. Yeah. And if you get to the end of the campaign and decide to re-engage, he knows what you're going to do. So in the first scenario, you get a little bit of a buff because you've taken him by surprise. In the end scenario, or the end of our chapter scenario, he knows you're going to charge.
If you charge him the first time, you can either get that buff once. That idea of charging him and him being not expecting it, you get that benefit once. You try it again, and he laughs and dodges out of your way. You think you can try that again?
He knows what you're doing. How dare you?
If you're subservient the first time...
And charge the second time.
No, not charge. If you're subservient the first time, one of the interactions you have the second time is the ability to brag upon to try to intimidate him with all the things.
I said that.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and he laughs and makes fun of you. But if you decide to charge instead, you'd actually get the buff the first time. Yeah. There's two sequences in the very first encounter where you could literally skip the fight because he just trolls off down the street and goes and continues to wreak havoc. But then you have different choices when you actually arrive to him in the end game.
There's so many pathways. There's things like breaking down a trapdoor. If you have a key to a trapdoor, you can open the trapdoor. If you break it down instead, you successfully break it down.
If you make a lot of noise,
this door opens, and a bunch of monsters are now aware of you before you were ready for them.
But if you successfully lockpicked it and kind of swung it open, if you had the option to do that, well, then nothing else happens. You get the benefit that's in the trapdoor.
The general idea is there's 3 types of keywords. I can't remember the exact names. One of them's called unfoldings, but there's basically titles you can acquire that have impacts within the scenario that go on to the next scenario, or have all the way until the end of a chapter series, which is generally going to be 4 scenarios, any 4 missions together, and you're going to have an unfolding at the end. Did you rescue the family? Did you engage with the merchant? Did you help the noble lord? And this is such
a cool part, because you could have various different endings based off of the decisions you've made. Like you're saying, all these consequences lead to little bits of story that are like, because you rescued this family, this is that part of the narrative.
Potentially with gameplay rewards, like items, equipments, things like that. Yeah. That is going to be by far the best addition to Apocalypse. Now, a few things to note. Let's go ahead. This is where you jump back if you avoided the spoilers. Boom. A few things to note. First of all, I believe their plan, I shouldn't say they are. Their plan is to try to backtrack all this stuff to the original game.
I was wondering if you were able to mention that already.
So they talk about how they're planning on doing that. I don't know if they're going to for sure. We'll see. Maybe it might be a funding issue. Maybe it might be a stretch goal. They want to be able to backtrack the story narrative to the original base game.
And because it's interesting. Because it's just story driven.
Yeah.
I think it's possible.
It works. It's about the rewards. You have to balance it correctly because you can't just add new stuff. But
it would be so cool to have what they're doing in this system re-implemented in that core box. Because it would, again, re-emphasize the idea of replayability.
Speaking of which, this is a good time to mention something I got wrong with Wild Hunt Levon Rising. This is an expansion. It's not a standalone game. In fact, it takes place after the original. Strictly speaking, the way they changed the way the prototype works to balance it for us. Strictly speaking, you're walking into this as a level 30 person, or whatever level you ended up with. They do have a leveling guide, so in case you played 4 characters and you want to try 4 new characters, which is reasonable, that's what I would do. They have a leveling guide. Yep. Grab this many gear, that many items, upgrades, all that. So they have a way to level up straight into it, but it is designed to be taking place with that, which is going to be interesting to see. Our prototype experience was great. Will they be able to maintain the balance of the game when you're dealing with much more powerful creatures on both ends? I hope so. We have not played with that, so we can't comment on that. Speaking of things we can't comment on, a big deal that I think is worth noting because of the way this went through, and I don't think you saw as much as I did. There's a lot of and again, prototype. I'll tell you why I'm saying that more in a second. There's a lot of typos. There's a lot of branching pathways that don't perfectly mesh. There's some copy-paste errors where two different pathways lead to the same direction, and you're like, well, that's a mistake. It's prototype.
I would go as far as to say the amount of narrative sequencing and connections that there's going to be. I would not be surprised at all with when this arrives there to be a bit of an errata on BGG. I would expect it as a backer.
Well, so I'm mentioning for a few reasons. The first of which is I've seen these things. Now, I didn't see any typos or things like that in the original Chronicles of Zendikar. I think this is very much the nature of a prototype does not go through the proofreading concept. That said, the degree of complexity they are inserting into this game,
that's where I'm thinking,
means I'm with you. I think that I think it's important that Creative Game Studios spends as much time as possible is streamlining this and making it so that every branching path ties in perfectly, every little note is perfectly checked. But there's going to be a lot of text, a lot of rules. There may well be little errata. Oh yeah, on page 32,
I'm not under the assumption that it'll be anything major based off of what they've delivered already. I am under the assumption that as a backer, you should kind of expect.
I would expect
a bit of a double check.
It's not like a free pass for them, but it's a complex, very evolving storyline with tons of interactions, tons of different ways this can go.
Yep.
So, with all that said, basically, I would say, my own opinion, I'll say my own opinion, I think every single change they've made, with one exception, we'll get to in a second, is likely an improvement for the better. It doesn't necessarily fix all my problems. I'll get to that in my final thoughts, the rating, all that. I would say the narrative system is far and away an incredible improvement to a game system, to the interaction system that I already loved in the original game. The one thing I would say that I'm kind of more mixed on is that token upgrade. It's another degree of fiddliness. I don't know if I needed that. I'm okay with it.
I almost would have liked more flexibility with cards or with... And I don't know. I don't know till I've fully experienced it.
It's just adding one more thing to be mindful of, especially when you pack it up and put it away, and you're like, oh, I have that token.
I really liked the ability to kind of lay these things down next to slots, and more asymmetry when it comes to that is always nice. I know there's going to be way more gear and upgrade pathways in the game. I'm curious to see how this integrates into that wider system.
Which could be interesting. So with that, though, that's, I think, everything else is, I would say, is either a step more, like more heroes, more this, more that, more scenarios. The game trace inserts, I'm very much looking forward to any degree of easing the ability to jump in. The darkness system, while still not something I love, it's a minor improvement to it, so I'll take that. I would say, mostly, this is steps forward in a game I already liked.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree. Like I said, I stuck the original at kind of a 3.5 to a 3 because it's hard to table.
Yeah.
This doesn't fix that.
Correct.
And I don't think it will. I don't think it can, honestly.
Marginally with the game trace.
I hope so.
But I hope so. I think marginally.
I just don't know how much. Yeah. And I don't know until I've seen. I don't know until it's in front of me. And with the amount of time that it takes, and they already do a lot. Like the darkness tiles that you were showing, they are organized. Where most people would leave those scattered in a box or stuck into a bag, they at least have them nicely organized. It doesn't change the fact that taking one at a time and placing it onto the board takes a little bit of time. I think this is still going to be a game that I have to and need to leave set up for 3 to 4 plays.
Yeah.
At least. I think, however, now, the improvement on the story, the branching pathways, the decisions that you're making there, and how compelling I think the narrative is, this one's going to be around a 4 for me because that leans me to getting it to the table and justifying that time more than the original did.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
That's where I am. Yeah. I don't think it fixes... If you played the original and you had major issues with it, I don't think this is
not going to change
drastically changing it.
Unless your issue was how linear the campaign was. That's the only major adjustment.
But if you enjoyed the original, if you liked the concept of it, it's heightening that. If you like the idea of this and you held off the original just to see when people's kind of ratings and reviews came in, I think you can back with confidence. I wouldn't steer anyone away from this. Absolutely but I would caution them so they knew what they were getting.
Watch the review, check out the likes and dislikes. So I agree with you completely. I think that the barrier to entry, again, Game Trace might improve it a little bit. The barrier to entry and getting this set up, I agree with you completely. I still kind of want to only touch it if I think I'm going to get 2 or 3 plays out of it minimum. Yep. The reason and incentive, like you said, to get it to the table, the reason and incentive is higher now. I want to go through this more. I want to experience it more. I would say overall, one thing I did this with Wild Descent, where I rated Wild Descent a 5, and Levant Rising I said 5+, because it's basically just better, but it's still a 5.
There are not as many games where I've played through the campaign, especially a prototype, and got to a point where I went, I have to check what would have happened if. Even things I'm thinking of, like the narrative through ISS Vanguard, had gut-wrenching moments. But I didn't go back and go, what would have happened if? This one did do that. This one, and you know, the decision was play 16 episodes of the same 4 scenarios, or double check and just check the pathway. Just see what would have happened. Just string it together a little bit.
Yeah, for me, this is an easy improvement over the original. The original I rated a 4. Probably would have been a very solid 4. This would be a 4+. If I was doing points, it would be like a 4.4, 4.5. It's still a 4 for me. The barrier to entry is just too big of a factor for me in the way I play games that I'm not going to be tabling this as much as I would like. That said, they have an incredible power-up system. They have an incredible narrative system. They have a solid dungeon crawl. They give me a lot of things just with a barrier of entry to getting it set up. This is the kind of game that I want that extra table on the side where I can just have a dedicated campaign set up, because I would 100% go through this. This is just too much fun and too interesting and too much. And I don't want to, like, for the sake of the prototype, I read Branching Paths because I want to know just how different it is.
You wouldn't actually do it in the core game.
In the core game, I've never done that. And I've never done it. When I played the original Chronicles of Runeterra, I never read alternate things.
Yes.
I did it with it. I have a hard time doing stuff like that. I don't like doing it. I do it for the sake of a prototype so I can tell you, wow, that does impact things. Like, and it's incredible.
We need to know, because it's still going to be a little bit of time before the game's actually in front of us.
Yeah, this is a solid improvement over the original. Currently on GameFound. Feel free to check it out. Again, you do need the original base game. Watch me be wrong about that. You do need the original base game though. But you can either get the original base game on GameFound, or have the original base game, or check out the second-hand market. Although I think they're pretty expensive right now, so don't check out the second-hand market. Although that goes towards the quality of the game. Sure. This game is rated very well on BGG, I believe. I don't know the exact rating. I think it's like an 8 point something.
Really solid.
Yeah, it is a solid system. If you like dungeon crawls, if you like powers abilities, if you like narrative branching pathways, Chronicles of Runeterra has a lot of things going for it.
Yeah.
That's basically it. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co.
I'm a duck.
And until next time, have a good one.